All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are about to get our next session underway. Where's our workers? A panel discussion. They'll all speak individually, and also we may have time for a Q&A session as well with them. So hopefully we will have time for that. If you want to take part in that, then please use the smartphone app. So on the stage, we have the Chief Executive of New Zealand Apples and Pears, Alan Pollard. We have the Chair of the Board at New Zealand Ethical Employers Inc., Tanya Pouwhare. And he might not be Hort NZ Chief Executive anymore, but he remains committed to the organisation's purpose, and of course the Bledisloe Cup winner from last night as well, Mike Chapman. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, and welcome to this session, everyone. This was going to be a different session, but then the Prime Minister made her announcement on Monday. So what we thought we'd do is start from that point and talk about what that announcement means. And what I'll do is I'll ask both Alan and Tanya to contribute. Alan, of course, has the ability to contribute from horticulture, particularly from apples, but he has a really good understanding of all horticulture. And Tanya, coming from the wine country of Marlborough, will be able to comment from the wine grape side. So for those of you who don't know, it's a collaboration between horticulture and wine grape growers in terms of the RSE Pacific scheme. And this is what principally we'll be talking about in this session, but also we need to talk about where the future's going, and that's really what we're keen to cover today. But in all our dealings with government, I think it's important for you to realise we've put together an industry collective. That industry collective, the three of us, three sixths of that collective. Also Colin Bond from NZKGI, Kate Hillstrom from Summerfruit NZ, and we have Philip Gregan and some other people from Wine NZ. But the contracting operation in Marlborough is where the labour sits, and so the Wine NZ contribution is really done through Tanya and Master Contractors, Ethical Contractors. So that collective started meeting every 2 weeks with Minister Farfoy last year, and we've kept those meetings running. That constant meeting with the Minister has been so important in keeping our issues in front of Cabinet and making sure that our voice is heard. And you can see the result of that with the Prime Minister's announcement on Monday. So we need to acknowledge the Minister's and Cabinet's response. We need to particularly acknowledge the officials' response, who, because you're meeting with ministers every 2 weeks, become very responsive to what you're saying to those ministers. And as Alan and Tanya can attest, I'm not beyond saying to the Minister, can you ask, my favourite person is Ruth Isaacs, who heads the policy team at Immigration, can you ask Ruth to do this for the next meeting, please, Minister? And whether or not Ruth does it, we then at the next meeting say, and remember, Minister, you asked Ruth to do this. Can she report, please? So it's an amazing way to get a lot of what you want going forward. The real pity with the movement of workers from the Pacific has been we've had to take them through quarantine. Now both Tanya and Alan and I will use anachronisms. MIQ means quarantine, QFT, quarantine-free travel. So when we descend into these acronyms, please remember that QFT means quarantine-free travel, what we're trying to move to. MIQ is where we're stuck at the moment with limitations and incredible costs on the employers involved. And BE, that stands for the movement we're doing. So if we talk BE, that means BE1 was the movement at Christmas that moved 2,012 workers from the Pacific. BE2 is the movement we're doing at the moment, which is 150 people every 16 days from the islands. But what we want to go is to QFT, quarantine-free travel, and increase the number of people coming in. So that's really enough from me. What I'll do is I'll now run some questions to Tanya and Alan and get a bit of a conversation going. And hopefully if you've got questions and we have time, we'll answer those questions. But Tanya, what does this announcement mean to your sector and to the future of your sector, and is it enough?
It's unfortunately a little late for our winter pruning in Marlborough and Central Otago. However, it is going to be very good for us coming into the growing season and then coming into harvest, and then hopefully sustained through to next winter. It also means that we can start getting some of these guys that have been in country for very long periods of time home, get them refreshed because they've got the skills. When it comes to winter pruning, especially a grapevine, it's not low skilled. The ability to know where to cut and how to wrap, it is something that is added to each season that they come back, and so it's really key that we get those skilled workers back for next pruning season.
Thank you. And Alan, from your sector?
Yeah, well, thanks, Mike. The announcement came as a sense of relief, really, to the sector. It wasn't a surprise in the sense that we've been working on some sort of solution with government for actually more than a year now. And in the last few months, we've started to see a change in thinking come from them. The CEs group, supported by our individual organisations, have put a huge amount of evidence and robust data together to support the idea that, firstly, it made no sense bringing people from COVID-free countries and putting them into the one place in New Zealand where we knew there was COVID. Made no sense to us at all. From our point of view, our last season was a terrible season, and I certainly acknowledge the resilience of, in my case, the apple and pear growers who got through that season, starting with COVID, moving into dreadful hail damage in Nelson and Centro Otago, moving into the labour disruption, moving into shipping and logistics. It has been an extremely challenging year, and my concern was we were starting to see little certainty and little hope for the season ahead. What this announcement does is at least gives us some certainty that some immediate labour challenges are going to be addressed.
And Tanya, how would you like this movement to start? When will it start? How would it happen? What's really needed to make this effective, considering we really have a sinking lid of RSE workers in the country at present?
Sure, we need to kick that off as soon as we can. However, there's a bunch of challenges that are out of the industry's control, where it sits between governments to governments. So New Zealand government and Pacific government have to agree on those bilateral agreements for this to even start. The operational side of it, there still needs to be oversight from the industry group, because unfortunately it's not just a matter of opening up the borders and allowing everyone in that wants to come in as soon as they can get on a flight. There's the mechanism with an ATR or an approval to recruit. There is the mechanism through Immigration New Zealand that you've got to get visas. To get a visa, you've got to have x-rays, medicals. There's got to be a whole application filled out. There's a whole bunch of things. So it takes around about 7 weeks for something to start to get, to actually being able to land a plane of 150 odd into New Zealand. So as soon as we get the heads up and as soon as we get more detail from the government about where those flights can start to come from, ideally it would be a couple of flights every week, and being able to get them into the country and out to the regions without the use of quarantine is just going to speed that process up, and it's going to be a heck of a lot cheaper for our growers.
So as you've probably gathered, Tanya is very good on the detail, and in the movements we've been doing since December last year, Tanya has identified a number of process improvements, not only on our side, but also for the immigration side. And part of these process improvements, we're trying to run into a review of how the RSE scheme works itself. This review has been consistently and constantly pushed back. But Alan, you know, if we can get this review back on track, what are the key things you'd be looking for out of an RSE policy review?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that there's some challenges with the scheme as we know it now, and for those of you in the room who regularly travel to the islands and have a look at where money's being reinvested, it's a disproportionate benefit to some of the communities in the islands. So I think there's a need to have a look at how do we more equitably distribute the benefits of the scheme across a much greater community over there. The other, I guess, is how do we build better training and education opportunities for workers while they're here as well? Because they're here not just as workers, but as our colleagues, and we're trying to upskill them so they take certain skills back to the islands to benefit their broader community and economy. So I'd like to see a bit more work done on training and education of workers while they're here as well.
So the figures roughly at this point in time in terms of RSE workers in the country, give or take a few hundred, there are about 7,000 in country, but about 5,000 of those have been here a considerably long time. And quite a few of those 5,000 in September will click over 2 years in New Zealand, not being able to get home. In terms of the numbers you'd like to see come in, Tanya, what sort of numbers would you think we need to get in with quarantine-free travel from the Pacific?
Well, our cap is 14,400, so that's what I'd like to see in. And so I think we have to keep the quarantine-free flights going in the peaks to be able to give us the labour that we need to take off those seasonal peaks within our industries and with each of those sectors. So the amount will be based on how many we can literally get into the country on a regular basis. But we've not only got our own challenges within our own systems that some work and some don't, or some could be better, but we've also got the capacity in the islands to push that many people through an X-ray machine, and they've only got one in each of the sending countries, and they're also used for their own nationals, for their own health system. So I think we've got to look at the realistic picture about how many we can realistically get through with our New Zealand systems and the constraints in the islands as well. But ideally, it would be getting up to that, getting up to the cap.
So, Alan, let's say we got 14,400 in, which would be miraculous. Would that actually solve our labour problem?
No, definitely not. If you work on a rule of thumb of a third migrant, a third backpacker, a third New Zealanders, and very clearly there's three parts of the equation we have to address. And those in the room will be fully aware that we normally expect 50,000 backpackers to be in New Zealand, and there's currently less than 10,000, and a number of those have been migrating across to Australia. So we're severely deficient in the number of overseas workers available to us. Now, whether that means we should also do a recruitment drive in Australia to bring backpackers back is something that should be on the agenda. The second part, of course, is that, and you'll have seen the announcement yesterday, unemployment's falling dramatically. It's forecast to go to 3%. So very low unemployment at a time when all of the sectors are competing for labour. And so the ability to access New Zealanders again is going to be highly constrained. I agree with Tanya. The cap's currently 14,400. In fact, the government approved an increase in the cap to 16,000 prior to lockdown. In my view, that's the target we should be looking at. The fragility we face, though, which I think you all have to be cautious about in the room, is that it would just take a community outbreak in New Zealand or a transmission in the islands and all bets are off. So it is a particularly fragile situation still.
I guess one thing about that fragile situation is we're partnering very closely with the government on this, so if there is an outbreak, we'll be both chastised together by the public of New Zealand, so there is some quaint comfort in that, I guess. So at the moment the figure is there are about 3,000 backpackers and dropping daily who are in New Zealand who are working in wine, grapes and horticulture. That figure is 10,000 short of what it might be at a normal time. What do you think we should be doing around trying to find this extra 10, 12,000 workers, even if we get the 14,000 in through the Pacific? Where would you find those 10,000? What would you do with New Zealanders, Tanya?
Well, can I just say, going right back, we've just come out of the deepest recession since the Great Depression. We came out the other side of that with 5.2% unemployment. That's phenomenal. And from my family to yours, thank you very much for being essential workers and helping to get us through that. So there is your resilience part of this conference. Pre-COVID, if we're just looking at the bigger, wider ecosystem within the labour market that we work in with New Zealand, Pre-COVID, we had more people entering New Zealand's labour market through permanent and long-term migration than from our school system. We've got unemployment, as Alan has said, has dropped sharply to 4%. It's predicted to go to a 16-year low next year. We've got a demography of the West Coast region now beginning to experience stagnation and decline, along with soon-to-be Southland, Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, Manawatu, Marlborough. And we've got low fertility rate in New Zealand, which means that the ratio of entrants into that labour market compared to those exiting, so Marlborough alone sees 1,200 people every year going into retirement and only 550 coming out of our school. So of those 550, majority, like half of that, end up in Auckland, Wellington and Christchurch. They leave as soon as they're out of college. So what I am saying that is that it's not our sector's problem to solve on our own. What we can do about it is we've got to plan for the future. So in 2025, 75% of our workforce will be millennials. And how many people understand what a millennial needs and a millennial wants? Most of the time, they want to work in the year we live. So we live in the year 2021, yet some of our businesses still act like it's 1975, with some of the technology, some of the culture that we have in our businesses. And I think we've got to transition and transform away from quantity into quality jobs for our Kiwi and our domestic labour. So how I would go to attract that is if we're looking at also at the moment our wages for the first time since December 2018, the annual wage inflation didn't outpace the annual household costs. So more money in, 2.1, more money out, 2.5. So our salaries are now paying for consumption and no longer wealth generation. So if it's paying for consumption, money is not going to be the driver. We can't just be throwing money, higher wages to get bums on seats. If you're talking to the Productivity Commission, it's like we just keep throwing people at this problem. We've got to get smarter about that. We've got to plan for the future. We've got to have an overarching strategy about how we get ourselves out of this. Second word, how do we recover from this? And it's not going to be done overnight. We don't have enough of the people in the pool to be all being dragged out from every sector has growth predicted. We had Minister O'Connor yesterday asking us, thanking us for our growth and continued growth. So how do we do that? If you have the answers, that would be great. Just let us know.
So that really brings us to the Productivity Commission, and Alan's made a bit of an art form of challenging them and taking them on. And a small plug for Alan's conference next week. He has the chair of the Productivity Commission coming to speak at his conference, and following that the Productivity Commission want to meet with the industry collective who's been working on labour to understand what we believe. So Alan, Productivity Commission talked about skills and automation. Can you give us a little bit of a sum up and a view of where you think they're going wrong?
Yeah, well, don't get me started on the Productivity Commission report.
We've only got 15 minutes.
I know, exactly. I mean, I'm sure you've all read it. I'm sure you've all stewed over it and sworn about it a few times too. It's a disgraceful piece of work and lumps all migrant labour together. And effectively they're saying that all migrant labour is low skill, low productivity, low value, that we engage migrant labour to dumb down wages for everybody else, and there's no incentive for them reinvesting in technology and automation. So it's not even worth commenting, frankly, on that report. It's disgraceful. However, as Mike said, we are engaging with Ganesh Nana, who's very interested in this space, I have to say, to get some factual information with him about the critical importance, particularly that the RSE scheme has played in the growth of all of our industries. If you think about it, you know, the fact that we have RSEs means we get the crop off the tree at the right time, with the right quality, the right value, which means that we can sell it for optimum prices in our markets, reinvest that back in growing our businesses, and it creates permanent jobs for New Zealanders. What a wonderful story that is to be telling. But if you look to the future, just picking up on Tanya's point and Mike's too, the government's made it very clear that they expect to see a transformation plan in place. And it's not just for horticulture, it's for every single sector in New Zealand. And the transformation plan has 4 parts to it. One is how do we attract people into the industry. And I think particularly in the last season, every one of you have done such an outstanding job in putting in place programs to try and attract people into work and building great pastoral care and salary packages and so on around that. The second part is around how do you develop and grow people while they're in the industry, so training and capability. The third bit is how do we get through seasonal peaks, and the fourth is technology, robotics and automation. And in our industry, post-harvest robotics and automation is world leading. But you know, we're part of a $100 billion apple industry, and no industry yet has created a commercially viable robotic harvesting capability. And our view is it's at least 10 to 15 years away. So if we are going to invest in that transition or transformation, you've all got to stay profitable in the meantime. And the only way you're going to stay profitable is if you get your crop off the trees at the right time, and the migrant labour will allow that to happen.
Yes, very, very valid points, Alan. So automation is one of these things which is coming along, Tanya, in the wine industry. Can you talk a little bit about current automation, innovation in that area and where it might go to? But more importantly, what is the timeline, and will it really change anything in terms of labour requirements?
Yeah, I spoke about this with a couple of my colleagues just last week, actually. We had a big tipping point in the viticulture industry when we went to mechanical stripping. So that took a lot of the labour-intensive stripping out of the vines once they've been cut away. We're not 100% transferred into climber. There are still some people that believe that the machines don't do as good a job, that leaves the grapevines or the wire systems in the vineyard a little bit worse off for wear. But it doesn't actually remove or reduce the requirement for labour. It just means that the growth and the requirement for labour kind of balance each other out for a set time. So there has been some trial around like the wire lifting technology and the wrapping down technology, but we're not quite there yet. It's slow, it's clunky, it doesn't actually work. So there's still we're still needing innovators within that area to come up with things to be able to implement. I think the technology where we're finding a lot of the benefit is around the in vineyard and in workplace. So the technology around how do you find out what each worker is doing, how do we get that through to wages, get that through to the account system, and then what do we do with that data, which is always one of the key things about anything that you do in your business is what is that 1% that we can do to improve. And I think that going through both Hort and Vit is going to be necessary and more necessary as we go on.
And so, Alan, in apples, and in kiwi fruit, labour is really needed for picking. Where do you see technology, automation, robotics kicking in, and when in the apple industry in particular, but perhaps a slightly more general comment as well?
Yeah, look, there's probably more people in this room who do this every day more qualified than I to say that. But as I said, on orchard, I think that technology is a little way away. We've already invested heavily in significant technological changes. So the structure of our trees, for example, is a significant advancement. We were not growing them three-dimensionally, we're growing them two-dimensionally to make the machine and robot ready. We've already got picking platforms in a number of orchards which allow people with perhaps less physical capability to work in orchards and otherwise wouldn't be the case. So there is a lot of technology happening, but in an apple orchard you don't just strip pick your tree. You have to make a conscious decision on every piece of fruit. And you have to be able to do that in different light conditions and different weather conditions. And, technology to do that is incredibly sophisticated. It's pretty telling that, one of the organisations who was a world leader in this development field has literally just gone into liquidation and lost its funding. So, that answer, I think, is a long way away, Mike.
And Tanya, do you think that, and you talked about it a little bit earlier, that our future workforce is going to be like the old workforce we had, or do we actually have to adapt and change?
We definitely need to adapt and change. We can't think that just because we did 75 hours a week, all uphill, and all uphill on the way down, that this is what our new workforce is going to be. We've got a war on talent, we all know that. So we've got to change the way that we think about what we offer. And it's changing it from the mindset of we've got we've got jobs that people need, to how do we create workplaces that people want to work for us. Excuse me, and just talking, going back to what Jimmy was saying, you can't change what you're not aware of, and how you change culture is by stories and by talking. So we've got to really reconnect with our communities that we live in, the schools that our kids attend, and the workplaces to find out what is important to employees. Like, what is it actually that they need? What is it that they want? What kind of support do they need? So multiple modes of working, do the hours fit for what they need? How do they feel a sense of purpose? Do they feel valued? Are they treated fairly? And these are conversations we can actually have right now with our domestic and New Zealand workforce. Instead of saying, well, you need a job, I've got some money, you come and do it and I'll pay you. And by the way, if you don't show up every day, like it's on the line, because that's not what I did. We need to say, well, why aren't they coming every day? Is it something to do, is there a 1% change that I can make in our environment? And whether that means in our offices, whether that means out in the field, the work itself can't change. The work itself is hard. The work itself is freezing cold, is in the heat of summer. So what can we do around that? And what can we do is to get to that point to know, because we can't come at this that we know our businesses, we know the future, because we need to come at it as, where is my knowledge gap? In the workforce that we're going to have, do we know what millennials want? Do we assume what millennials want? It's asking those questions. It's having a conversation with the current workforce that we have. How can we do better? And then listening to that and then repeat it. So you test it, you trial it, you ask again, is this better? No, test it, trial it, ask again.
Well, that's quite a change. Alan and I are probably on the way out here. Well, I am anyway. Alan, a comment on that and a final word before we move to the next bit of the session.
Yeah, look, I agree with Tanya, and to me it's about telling our story, and historically I don't think we've told our story enough, but we're seen as part of the important future of this country, and we had an aspiration of $10 billion. I know Cameron Baggery, if he's still in the room somewhere, once said to me that that's just under aspiring, and we should be looking at 20 and 30 billion, and rightly so. We have world-leading industries here that are second to none. Number one kiwi fruit, number one apple, number one across a number of sectors. And if you think about the generation we're trying to attract, a lot of the values that drive them today are stuff actually that we can demonstrate as part of our own values. Think about sustainability, whether it's economic, environmental, social or cultural. We have some of the most sustainable industries on the planet. So to connect those, I think, should be what we're focusing on, Mike.
Yeah, no, thank you. And thank you, Alan, for your contribution. Tanya, we'll give you the last word.
Really?
Not really.
I'm surprised. No, you're going to say we don't have time for that.
No, normally I don't give Tanya the last word.
No, because it's never the last word, because it just keeps going.
Oh, that's the last word? Made a fool of me. So there are some questions that have come up. And in the next session, Emma Bowes, who has just turned 25 today. Happy birthday, Emma. Will, as one of those workers we are talking about, attempt to answer at least 2 or 3 of those questions. So what Emma's going to talk about is what Alan touched on, industry transformation plans, workforce transformation plans. And this is the future that we're in, and this is a future, whether we like it or not, we need to embrace. So Emma hopefully is here. Alan?
So I can just make one last comment before we do leave the stage, because I don't want Mike to walk away without some acknowledgement too. And I just want to actually acknowledge Mike's role in this whole Labor discussion. He's been an advocate, he's been a champion, he's been a mediator amongst industries and government, just unfailing in his passion for trying to come up with a resolution. And I'm absolutely sure we wouldn't be in the place that we are today without Mike's leadership and contribution. So I just want to acknowledge that, Mike.
Oh, thank you, Alan. Thank you.